Today, viewers, I want to welcome you to the Offaly History presentation for Heritage Week. This is the second one in the series and is on Cormac Street, the Glories of Cormac Street, with its very fine buildings and the people of the street. And our first in the series was on O'Moore Street, which directly adjoins Cormac Street. And I want to thank those who are mentioned here, and also the Heritage Council for their support. We start again with just situating Cormac Street. It was called Charleville Street and Charleville Parade and Charleville Place in the 19th century, and that was because it was the road to the Charleville Castle, the big house of Tullamore, which is shown on that 1-inch map beyond the Red Gate. And the railway line is shown there just where the R is in Tullamore, and it's between the railway line and the road to Killy is Cormac Street, and that's what we want to talk about today. Now, the Taylor and Skinner map is one of the earliest of the town maps for Ireland. It's a kind of a road book for the country, and you can see there the windmill that was featured in Tullamore from the 1720s to the 1820s. And the chapel or church is also shown in Church Lane or Church Street, as is a little representation of the big house in Charleville, which dated back to 1641 and which was occupied by a Johnson in the 1780s. The castle ruins would be a reference to Shire Castle. And Larkin's map then of 1809, which has been published, again shows Cormac Street with buildings on the east and on the west side, and it gives us an indication of the extent of the street, which was largely a new street post 1786, and starting with Acres Hall. The 1838 map gives us more detail. For one thing, it shows us the extensive gardens behind Acres Hall, and which took up all the possible garden space of the terrace of houses beside it on what is called there Charleville Street, and which we know as Cormac Street. And to the east side is another terrace, and also the Wellington Barracks and the Courthouse, and beyond that the jail. So Cormac Street then has a strong residential element in no less than 4 terraces of houses, one beside Acres Hall, one on the opposite side of the street, and then you have one where Wellington Barracks is marked there, that's the third one, and the fourth would be the jail or warders' houses, and the fifth is a small terrace of 10 houses opposite the jail, which are also on the Acres estate lands. So really the Acres people, the family who lived in Acres Hall, owned about 3/4 of Cormac Street and were responsible for the development of nearly all of the property there, with the exception of the jail and the warders' houses, together with the courthouse. A close-up again showing the extensive garden behind Acres Hall, which is in number 1 Cormac Street, and the jail is shown here, with the warder's house in the centre, and the front wall of the jail survives, and you can see that in any views of Cormac Street. We'll see some shortly, and the back was destroyed in the 1922 in the Civil War. The courthouse was also destroyed, but it was rebuilt, and you see a reference there to a subterranean passage between the jail and the courthouse. Now, right opposite the jail and the courthouse, there was no terrace there at that time in the 1830s. That terrace of 10 houses with the canopies over the entrance doors was not completed till about 1880. And here's another view of it. We have the hall mentioned there in just below the Presbyterian Church. That's Acres Hall. And on the opposite side you have the manse, which was the first of the really big houses at the top of High Street, and the first house that the Earl of Charleville would have seen when he would be leaving his estate or the domain at Charleville and coming into the town of Tullamore. And he would have come down Charleville Street and turned right to go into O'Moore Street and on down to Bachelor's Walk and to the parish church, the Protestant church at St. Catherine's. And we've another view then, just to keep you in touch with the routes. You can see there the graveyard at Kilcruttin is mentioned, and as I said, the cabin type buildings that were opposite the courthouse and jail. The windmills were in ruins by the time that this map was made in 1838, and probably also the Wellington Barracks may well have been rebuilt at that stage as the 6 houses that it is now to the front, with smaller buildings to the back. These buildings are shown here, or some of them are, on this map of 1888, which again shows part of Cormac Street. And you see there the terrace on the eastern side was called Charleville Place at that time, and on the west side simply Charleville Street, with Acres Hall and the extensive garden of Acres Hall behind the terrace on the western side. And here it is again, showing you the 1912 with these properties, including the jail. The jail terrace is marked in, and this one, the warders' houses, they date only to 1889. And now also the terrace built by the Acres Pierce family in front of what is the Cormac in Cormac Street. You can see 10 houses there, and beside it is the railway house, or the station master's house, and close by to that the station for the Great Southern and Western Line. Here again is the aerial shot of the area here, showing now the site of the jail, which is completely covered over with buildings for what was the salts factory in the 1930s, and the facade only of the jail surviving to the front of Cormac Street. Beyond that then was the courthouse itself, behind the buildings that were part of Tullamore Yarns. And beyond that again were where the green sheds are. These were parts of the gardens of O'Moore Street and of the windmill, of Cormac Street I should say, and of the windmill plot. And over on the western side then, or the left side, you have the terrace that was built in 1880 first of all. To below that again is the railway house, and beyond both of those to the north are the grounds of the town park, followed on by the terrace built by Acres in the 1790s, and his own large house known as Acres Hall. And here's a postcard view of the street in the 1910 or so, showing the town park and the folly, Acres Folly, on the garden of Acres Hall on the left, with a gas lamp there, which was the only source of light until electric light was provided in 1921. Beyond that is a shed belonging to Lloyd's Farm, hence the name of the park today known as Lloyd's Town Park. And beyond that, the terrace on the left that was built by Thomas Acres, the developer, in the 1790s, early 1800s. In the centre of the street in the background is number 29. The significance of that I've mentioned already. And on the right then is the terrace that Acres built to house soldiers during the Napoleonic Wars. And where you have these railings here in the foreground on the right, that was the site of the Wellington Barracks, and 6 houses were built there, possibly in the mid-1830s. Again, the lease map is important, and I mentioned this in connection with O'Moore Street. You can see there the plots for Cormac Street. On the western side is the Acres Hall, and a legend there, Thomas Acres Forever. To the south of that is the lands that now comprise the town park, and to the south of that again is the field where the terrace of 10 houses were built, and also the station master's house for the railway station and lodge house that were built in the 1860s. And on the eastern side of the street then is the extensive plot that fronts onto part of Earl Street or O'Moore Street, and was originally part of the Windmill plot. So the map of the Acres Hall and the terrace on the west side is shown here in a hand drawing of about 1790, which is just copied over there to a later lease. And that shows Kilcruttin Hill. And the field there where it's mentioned to be Robert McMullen's, that's the town park. And then the small area of 0.25 roads and perches, that's the site of the terrace of 10 houses. And where we see the word Five Alley, that would be Kilcruttin, and where the railway and bottling plant are today. The man who provided the sites originally was the first Earl of Charleville, shown here in his robes as the Grand Master of the Freemasons of Ireland. And the monument on the right there, which is in St. Catherine's Church, tells the story of the Earl, Charles Moore, first Earl of Charleville, and his death without children in 1764. The property then passed to his nephew, who's depicted here by a bust sitting on the urn. His nephew died in the same year as the Earl, and he was succeeded by the grandnephew, who was Charles William Bury, and who came of age in 1785. And the big house then that received a lease in 1790, but the house itself, which is at the opening to Cormac Street, is Acres Hall, number 1 Cormac Street, and the lodge house there to the right of it, and beyond that the Presbyterian Church. That was the house with the highest valuation in Tullamore in the 1850s at about, I think it was £35 or £40, which was the highest until Dew Park was built in 1900. And to the left in the picture is number 1 Moore Street, which has its compatriot in Cormac Street, which we'll see in a moment. Some more details there of the Acres Hall house. First of all, on the right, showing it, the poor condition it was in by the 1970s, and then the restoration of it minus the lodge in the 1980s, and its use by the Tullamore Town Council and now the Municipal Council. The terrace then below Acres Hall is depicted here in both photographs, just from different angles, and was a terrace of about 10 houses, all nicely tiered there, with 3 of them were 3-storey. They're dated to the 1790s, where the sports shoe shop is today, those 3 houses. Now one of them is rebuilt house, but the other 2 are original 1790s houses. And beyond that, into the background, are 2 houses with some brick in them, some red brick. They were built actually as rebuilds in the 1890s. There used to be a date on the chimney until it was plastered over. And the first house there with the round-headed door case and the Georgian glazing bars, that would be of the 1790s as well, and would have been built by Thomas Acres. So that would be the first block of houses in the street. And you can see here the 3-storey houses, 2 of which are original to the 1790s, and 1 of which was built new on the site of an earlier house in the 1970s. Now, putting that on a map then, you can have a look there at the valuation map, and you'll see number 1 Cormac Street running on down to number 11. And those taller houses have a slightly bigger garden. I think they're number 5 and 6 there, and they survive up to now anyway. And there's a little bit of shading then. That's where the rebuilding took place in the 1890s. And what's called number 8 there behind is the extensive garden of the Acres Hall. So the later houses then that were built on the site of cabins and were only built in 1880, there are 10 of those. One of them was a shop, Kemmy's, and that's why it has those larger windows that were probably inserted in the 1950s or 60s. And some of them have still their canopies, which is nice, the original canopies. The letter there is an undertaking from the builder, Thomas Cleary, of 1880, undertaking to build 6 houses for £820. Well, he went on to build 10, but we don't know at the moment what was the overall contract price. but that is the date of the houses. They look lovely, but of course they had no water or sewerage when they were built, and they didn't get that until at least the 1920s. The Acres Hall and the whole of that terrace were built on the plot known as the Kilcruttin Hill plot, but on the opposite side of the street was the terrace built for the army officers, and that's known as the Windmill Hill plot, and extended as far as the boundary with the present day courthouse. The owner of Tullamore, Charles William Bury, at the time, he reserved 2 plots for the jail and for the courthouse, wisely enough, when leasing the rest of the street to Thomas Acres. Now there's the view of the east side of Cormac Street, where the men are standing, and there are cyclists there in the 1950s. And number 1 there was the round-headed doorcase where the pole is. That would have been a highly valued house, almost £40 in valuation, close enough anyway to Acres Hall. And that house would have been lived in as by one of the well-to-do people at all stages in the town of Tullamore. In the 1850s it was Richard Goodbody, who was a tobacco manufacturer and was a son of Robert Goodbody, who had come to Clara in 1825. Now there's a very nice picture there by the late Gard Handley on the right, and that's of 2 houses built probably in the late 1830s and designed to be attractive and to set off the courthouse, which is on the extreme right. The courthouse is dated 1835 and is in the classical style. And in all 6 houses were built on the Wellington Barracks fronting the street. But if you look at the map of the Wellington Barracks there on the left, you will see that there was also a terrace of no less than 12 valued properties in what was called the Wellington Barracks Lane and later became Coleman's Place. So there are 6 properties there to the front of the street. 2 of them, the big houses with large gardens, or one of them anyway has a very large garden, and the other one less so. And then it runs into 4 properties. But to the back then and to the side lane there are other little houses. There were cabins that are valued at about £1 a week. And beyond that on the right are the 9 houses in the terrace on the east side of Cormac Street. One of those, number 9, is actually comprised of 2 houses, and it was used as a hotel for a while, and in the 1850s was lived in by Francis Berry, who was the agent to the Earl of Charleville. And you can see number 1 again across the street, which is the Acres Hall property. That's them again, number 14 in Cormac Street there, and the map on the right can be seen here as the grey pebble dash building, which was the officers' barracks, an infantry barracks. In fact, in the basement of one of those houses are inscribed the names of different regiments in the army that were stationed in Tullamore in the 1790s and early 1800s. And beyond the grey pebble-dashed house with the blue door is the terrace of houses that runs right down to the 2 tall houses beside the courthouse, which we had a picture of a moment ago. And here's the valuation of that side of the street, starting with the jail and the courthouse at substantial valuations, which of course they didn't have to pay rates because they were exempt. And then you have the 2 big houses. The first one there, number 3, Casson, that would be the one with the large garden, while number 20 had no garden of any significance, the other large 3-storey house. And that's, or 2-storey over a basement, I should say. That was valued at 20. And then number 9 is actually 2 properties, and hence the valuation on the building of £23. And running up to Robert James Goodbody's, that's the pebble-dashed house we saw a moment ago, the grey pebble-dashed house, coming in at £24. Now behind that then in Wellington Barracks are these small houses. First of all, there's a collection of them that are charged up to George Pearce, who was the son-in-law of Thomas Acres. And then you have houses valued at no more than £1. There were about 10 or 12 of those, which are very insignificant beside the houses valued at over £20. On the other side of the street, then again, you see George Pierce, medical doctor, there, and that's his own house, valued at £34. And below that, then the more modest houses, including 2 or 3 there, the 1790s ones, where the sports shoe person is, valued at £5 each. So that side of the street, the houses were more modestly valued than those on the opposite side. But these are the earlier houses. And I say earlier, probably mid-1790s. And the ones on the eastern side, beyond the Brian Adams house, where the grey pebble dashing is, they would be about 1800. Now, taking a views again, the terrace on the right we've mentioned already. That's an 1880 terrace. Now, the house on the left of that terrace is the station master's house, or used to be, and it had 2 doors on it. And maybe that's an adaptation of a house that was built in 1830 by Francis Berry and done nicely so as to be attractive as people came out of the new jail, which was completed in 1830. You can see there the elaborate ironwork showing the Roman fasces or axes, which was the symbol of authority in the Roman Republic and was translated then into Victorian courthouses. Here's the courthouse itself. These are on the big plot that was reserved by the Earl of Charleville for public buildings. And you have 3 items there. First of all is the one that was finished first anyway, is the Gothic style jail where the warder is standing. That was completed in 1830 over a 4-year period and was in use as a jail until the end of 1921, and it was destroyed by the Republicans when they were leaving Tullamore in July 22. And to the right of that are the warders' sort of cottage or arts and crafts style houses, which were built in 1889 at a cost of about £200 each. And here in the left, in the foreground, is the county courthouse, which is in the classical style and was designed by J.B. Keane and was built and finished over a 3-year period in 1835. And it was that building of that, the completion of those buildings, especially the courthouse, and the move of the assizes from the old capital Dangan, that made Tullamore the county town. Here is just a detail of the jail. It was probably best known in the 1880s when the plan of campaign prisoners were there and who refused to wear their prison uniform, and one of whom, John Mandeville, died arising from his time in the cell without proper clothing, and he went off back to Cork and didn't live very long after. And I suppose you can see there the transfer of political power in Ireland in the early 1920s, and of course again in the 1930s when De Valera came to power. You can see the names of the grand jury members, the big landowners, Lord Tullamore and others, Thomas Bernard of Kennedy Castle, and Valentine Bennett. And Francis Berry is mentioned there, the man who lived in number 9 Cormac Street. He was the agent to the Earls of Charleville. And then over on the right are men of the Republican IRA who were involved in the burning of the jail and the courthouse in the 1922, including the well-known Jim Clark, I think, and Al O'Brennan there holding his hat. And the jail then was put to more commercial uses in the 1930s. The facade survived, but as we saw from the early aerial photograph, the behind was a lot of warehouses for the production of the worsted wool, and a big staff there. There was over 600 employed and up to nearly 1,000 at one stage. That picture was taken in 1949. The courthouse then was destroyed also, and that's a view of it in 1922 following the fire. And it was rebuilt in 1927 and then substantially improved and adapted again for modern use in 2007. And there have been improvements also in things like the ironwork in front of the jail and the courthouse. And also the warders' houses are looking much better today than they did back 10 years ago. All have been cleaned and improved, and while the fasces or ironwork are there as symbols of authority, the newly improved railings and houses show how much the heritage of Tullamore is coming to be appreciated. So with that, I want to conclude and to thank in particular those who directly contributed to the making of this huge hoop, including Amanda Pedlow and Pádraig Siri, and also to the Heritage Council for its support. Thank you very much.